skills that empower you and your family to live, work, and thrive. Before we get started, I just want to go over a few housekeeping rules. First, be respectful and open of others throughout the presentation. Feel free to type your questions into the Q&A box and comments into the chat box. The Q&A box does have a feature that allows you to ask questions anonymously if you're more comfortable with that. We have some great agents monitoring those for us today. We've got Leah, Melody, and Myrna that are going to monitor and make sure all of our questions get answered, and those will be towards the end of the presentation. Today's session will be recorded and posted to our Living Well Wednesday web page, along with additional resources that come up throughout today's presentation. You will be able to find all future and past programs on our website as well. Sherilyn Jackson will also be raffling off a door prize for us today as a thank you for joining in and listening to all this great information. And lastly, a friendly reminder, our Living Well Wednesday series has discussed new topics every second and fourth Wednesday from January through March. And that's been over the lunch hours. So thank you to everyone that's been able to join us for those. Be sure to check out our webpage for additional details on registration and topics for upcoming presentations. Next, we want to acknowledge that KSRE is an equal opportunity employer. Therefore, we do not discriminate against anyone. If there is a special request or concern that you need to allow for you to attend our programs, please reach out to us and let us know. Next, we want to thank our presenters for joining us today. We have Deb Wood from the Central Kansas District and Joy Miller from the Southwind District. Both of these ladies are the family and resource management agents for their districts. And with that, I will turn it over to Joy.
All right. Thank you, Cassidy. You want to go to our first slide, please? All right, thanks. So severe weather can happen anytime in any part of our country. And in fact, there's 18 different types of what we might call natural hazards. So just out of curiosity, how many of you may have experienced a natural disaster? And you can either do the raise a hand or just pop in the chat. Yes, you've experienced that. Just so we kind of know if people are never experienced it or have some experience with this topic. See a few yeses. A hurricane, tornado. Yeah. So interestingly, disasters have doubled in the last 20 years. And that doesn't include our recent pandemic. So I found that interesting that we're seeing more and more of them. And just like, in Kansas, we're not going to experience a hurricane. We all may experience disasters in different ways. And in fact, even in our state, some of us may be more prone to certain disasters than others. And I believe Rachel popped into the chat box a link. You can go onto the Fema website and look at your specific county's history of natural disasters. So when I was comparing Salina to Fort Scott, Salina is more likely to have tornadoes than Fort Scott, Kansas is. So, but knowing the hazards and disasters you may face is extremely important because the response and recovery to each of these different types of disasters impacts you differently, and you should prepare differently for each of them. So next slide, please. Oops. All right, thank you. So FEMA stands for our Federal Emergency Management Agency, and they do serve as a safety net if a disaster happens. But just to give you a little insight, the relief program is called Individuals and Households Program. And there's a maximum of $30,000 per household to assist with housing repairs and replacement, temporary housing assistance, and other needs. So an example of how this has played out in the past, when there was a hurricane in 2017, 4.7 million people applied for this assistance, but only 35% received some financial funds. The average was $4,300 for housing assistance paid to survivors, and $1,300 for other needs. So while there's assistance, it isn't a lot, and qualifying, I don't know why not everybody qualified, but you can see that it's not 100% that there will be a safety net for you as we move through this presentation. Also, FEMA just wants you to really know that they are not here to make you whole again. They're there to help you get through the moment. So next slide, please. So a study was done by the Urban Institute and found that the financial impact of natural disasters is immediate and long-term. It can go for as long as 4 years out. And the severity of the financial impact grows over time. It has that snowball effect. And a disaster can immediately lower your credit score and increase your burden of debt, bankruptcy, mortgage delinquency, and foreclosures. So many disasters are considered medium-sized, which are less likely to receive any long-term public recovery funding, and have a larger negative effect on our financial health. So these are the events that don't make the national news and many people do not hear about. So for people already experiencing financial fragility, even before a disaster, it can really create even more so of a scenario when we can't cover like that $400 emergency dollar fund. So next slide, please. So our goal today is to make sure that a natural disaster doesn't become a personal disaster for you. And the time you spend today preparing will save you even more time in the future, lessen your worry, stress, anxiety, and maybe even shock. We want to help you protect your assets. We want you to help do some debt control, whether that's staying out of debt, reducing debt, or even avoiding taking on more debt. Also to help speed recovery and have better outcomes, and to have the freedom and the ability to assist others as needed. Next slide.
So when people think about emergency preparedness, we often think about stockpiling food and water, gathering flashlights and chargers, or maybe some extra clothes. This is Emergency Preparedness Week, which I don't know whether the organizers realized that when they planned this topic, but it's kind of perfect timing. And, on the news, we've been hearing a lot, and those are the kinds of things they mention. In May of 2016, we had an EF4 tornado level our farm. It took out 10 buildings, all of our belongings, farm equipment. It just reduced them to pulp and rubble. So I'm one of those people who used to think this is something that could never happen to me. And we certainly aren't unique in this situation. Just on this webinar, there's several of you that have also experienced disasters, some tornadoes, flooding, and so forth. And most recently, fires destroyed 35 homes in Reno County just this last weekend. So stop and think, what would you do if you were left with nothing but the clothes on your back? Where would you even start to pick up the pieces and rebuild your life? And we've identified 4 key areas where individuals and families can prepare in advance that will really help you financially in the recovery process if something like this does happen to you. These main areas are having an emergency fund, protecting your assets by making sure that you're adequately insured, compiling a home inventory and keeping it up to date, and putting together a grab-and-go box to safeguard your important documents. These are our financial management best practices that we would recommend for people anyway to help keep your finances organized. But they're really steps that you can take that would be especially helpful in the event of an emergency of any kind. Next slide, please. You can better prepare yourself for the unexpected by maintaining an emergency savings fund. You may typically think of using an emergency fund when life throws you unexpected financial roadblocks like a large medical bill or a car or home repair or the loss of a job. But having cash on hand can help you with any pothole that's thrown in your path. If it's an unexpected natural disaster, you have funds to draw on immediately without having to run up expenses on your credit card. Like Joy mentioned, ruining that credit score by doing so because then not having those funds to pay that bill. or having to dip into retirement savings to pay those bills. So, you may have to wait to receive an insurance check. You may be unable to work for a period of time, depending on how widespread the disaster was and if your employer was affected or if you were injured. We typically recommend keeping 3 to 6 months of living expenses liquid in an account, such as a savings account or a mutual fund, something that's easily accessible. If you're a business owner, I would encourage you to also think about keeping reserves for this purpose. If you decide not to insure some items, keep in mind the value to replace those items in addition to deductibles when determining, how much to keep in that reserve to help you recover. I'd also suggest, backing up financial and payroll records to a cloud or another off-site storage device, someplace away from your main residence or your place of business, so that you're able to recover those records and in the event of a disaster. Next slide, please. The next item that will really help you in the recovery process is to annually review your life insurance coverage to make sure it's adequate. Purchasing insurance is a way to transfer the risk in the event of a catastrophic event, something that will have a high severity of impact on your finances, like a tornado or a fire in the case of property insurance, or a major health event in the case of health insurance. We take on that personal responsibility, and insurance is a way to make us whole. As Joy mentioned, FEMA, the government, those programs are not designed to do that. It's something that you'll look to insurance to help with. It's a way to protect those assets or your net worth that you've built up. And if you're a homeowner, your home may be your biggest investment that you have. So one thing I would encourage you know what you have. Get familiar with your insurance and what it covers, and maybe just as importantly, what it doesn't cover. And this is true whether we're talking about property and casualty insurance or health, disability, and life insurance. Most homeowners policies are going to require an endorsement or a separate policy, for example, to cover earthquakes or floods. And sometimes people don't realize this until they go to file a claim, only to find out that it's not covered under their policy. Take a look at whether the amounts are adequate. Homes should be insured for at least 80% of the replacement cost, or you may find that if you have a partial loss, you're only partially compensated to fix that damage. If you have a total loss, of course, there's not going to be, the insurance policy is not going to pay more than that limit that you set on the policy. So if you haven't checked this in several years, you may find a big gap between the value of your home and the cost to replace it if you're underinsured. So, which could leave you with a big gap between an insurance payment and the cost to rebuild. Homeowners policies typically cover the contents at about 50 to 60% of the home value, depending on the policy. So, for example, if your home's insured for $200,000, the contents would be insured up to $100,000 to $120,000. And this coverage can be purchased at actual cash value, which means that they're going to take into consideration when you purchase that item and how much you paid for it, and then how much it's depreciated when they go to pay out for that claim, or replacement value, in which they would actually purchase a new, the replacement cost of a new item to replace what was lost. If you feel the contents of your home are worth more than that, you may want to increase coverage, or you can add riders for specific items. So that may be a consideration depending on what all you have. There are other parts of a homeowner's policy, things like debris removal, outbuildings, trees, and shrubs that are typically covered for a specific dollar amount or a percentage of the policy limit. So get familiar with what you have there. Another thing that some people don't realize that they have with their insurance policy, their homeowner's insurance or renter's insurance, a lot of times is going to be what are called additional living expenses. Those are usually limited to 10 to 20% of the policy limit. But if you're displaced due to a covered event, and you have to find, hotel rooms, a place to rent, if you have to eat meals out for a period of time because you're living out of a hotel, you don't have you're not in your home, it can cover additional mileage, storage of belongings that you were able to salvage, those kinds of things. So that's something too to be aware of. Next slide, please. Once you've taken a look then at your coverage, you'll want to determine whether or not you're adequately insured or whether you need to change your coverage. Your insurance agent is going to be a good resource for you here. They should have a pretty good idea of what it costs to build homes, that cost per square foot in your area, and an idea of what the value of your home is. So, you know, setting up a meeting with them once a year to take a look at things and then determining whether or not you need to increase that value would be something we would recommend. You'll need to determine, you know, what your budget can afford also. So that may be a discussion on whether, you know, increasing the deductible, for example, might help to reduce those premiums. But keep in mind too, then, you know, for that emergency fund, having the value of those premiums built up in there, not premiums, deductible, built up in there so that you're able to cover that cost in the event that something like that happens. I'm just going to mention too, since I know this is something that we experienced with the farm, don't just take a look at your homeowner's costs, you know, take a look too at farm equipment. Those are usually scheduled for a specific dollar amount on your insurance policy. If farm machinery prices are going up and in as short supply as vehicles are at this point in time, you know, that may be something that you need to up the limits on those also. I know one thing that we have found, we were underinsured on our irrigation pivots, and we had just reviewed the cost and increased coverage the previous year, about 6 months prior, but costs had just gone up that much. And we recently did that again after the first of the year when the derecho came through last December. We had a lot of pivot damage in our area, and it didn't affect us personally, but we were hearing the cost of how much things had gone up from neighbors. And so that's something that we decided, you know, it's probably time to increase that again. So if you have a farm, you know, take a look at that also. Office and shop contents, if you have a business too, might be things that are overlooked. So just some ideas of things to keep in mind when you're taking a look at that coverage. Next slide.
Okay. So flooding is one of the most common and costly disasters in the United States. And FEMA says the statistic has been true that over time, that 1 inch of water can cause $25,000 worth of damage to your home. So the likelihood is you're going to have way more than 1 inch. But again, as Deb mentioned, typical homeowners insurance does not cover flood damage. And in fact, only about 22% of people have flood insurance. When you take out flood insurance, there is a 30-day waiting period. So it's one thing not to delay. And FEMA has another example of how insurance is so important compared to their disaster relief program. So they had 2 homes of similar value of about that had flooding during the hurricane season. One had a flood insurance policy and the other household did not. So one received a $200,000 compensation payout who had the flood insurance, and the other house did not and only received the $31,000 from FEMA. So again, just that stressor, insurance, while it might be expensive, when you really need it, it's going to help you recover faster and get back on your feet, where FEMA is not, again, designed to make you whole. So next slide, please. Rachel is going to post a poll for us if you'll answer. If you had to file an insurance claim, would you be able to list the possessions that were lost or damaged?
We have responses coming in pretty quickly, so we'll give it a
Okay.
few more seconds and then we'll end it, and then I'll share the results with everyone. So if you haven't answered yet, go ahead and answer. And here are the results.
All right, so mostly some, few no and a few yes. So next slide, please. All right. So developing a household inventory can be extremely helpful. And typically, if you don't have that household inventory, it may be hard to recover or claim everything that you could because you haven't remembered it. My husband's house had been broken into, and it wasn't until he went to go look for something about a year later did he realize that, oh, maybe that item had been stolen. So the typical household has about 300,000 items. So I can't even imagine maybe coming up with 1,000 items, let alone if that's an adequate or true number. So we might lose money if we are underinsured. So if we have more items than we are insured for, as Deb had talked about previously, or we can lose money through an insurance claim because we don't remember the item that we have lost. But when you do an insurance claim, there is more than just remembering the actual item. They're going to want to know the value of the item, what you paid for it, what's the brand, model, serial number, when did you purchase it, when filing those claims. So if you can imagine, you're under stress already. That when we're under that added stress, it's hard to remember and think about all those extra things. So that household inventory is going to help provide that proof of those possessions. So maybe you have quite the collection of art or jewelry or guns. So again, it provides that proof. Helps determine the value of an item or insurance need. So again, that inventory list can be a good determination whether you need more insurance or not. And it can be of assistance with your insurance, taxes. So we want to keep a copy of paperwork in a home file, and then also consider storing it online or in the cloud where it can be retrieved outside if something happens to your home in that original copy. Keep things up to date, review them often, and as you acquire new things, add them to your inventory. So being sure to include things like a photo, the purchase price, things like that. So again, open up your cupboards, your closets, and just take a picture. That can be helpful instead of each individual item. Having those pictures can help jar your memory when you're doing those claims to record all that information. And again, get an appraisal on valuable items such as your artwork and jewelry. Rachel put in, there's 3 different household inventory resources. We put in the link for you. A lot of them you can order and get a physical book. You can download a PDF, or you can do a form fillable so that you have that online. So again, this inventory can be helpful, not just if you have a natural disaster, but again, if there's a fire, or if your household is broken into, or if there's vandalism, just a lot of things that it can be helpful in the future. Next slide. So then we want to talk about safeguarding some important documents, and you can see there's a variety of them, whether it's personal identification, those monthly expenses like utilities, financial accounts, whether that's bank accounts or investment accounts, your insurance policies, medical information, estate plans, contacts, and then anything related to your business. So having all those documents gathered can save time, reduce your stress, and avoid costly mistakes, and of course, recover faster. So this proves what you own and that you are who you are when you apply for any assistance or claims when in future needs. And so in this area, FEMA has an emergency financial first aid kit. And again, that document is available online, so it's a form fillable one, or you can order the physical paper document and they'll send you that for free. We also have our case stay, our valuable records. And the benefit of those two documents is it'll help guide you which pieces you need to pull together so that you have them ready to go. Next slide, please.
Okay, Rachel has brought up the second poll we have for you here. And the question we want to ask you now is, would you or your family be able to quickly grab your most important documents if you needed to evacuate or leave immediately due to a natural disaster? Just a quick yes or no if you could reply there.
Once again, those results are flying in. We'll give it just a few more seconds and then I will end the poll and we'll see what the results are. There are our results.
Well, I'm glad to see that most of you could. 54% answered yes and 46% no. And I'm going to go ahead and close that. Cassidy, if you can go ahead and go to the next slide. So what we want to talk about next is a grab and go box. So once you've got these documents gathered, what do you do with them to keep them safe? And I highly would encourage you to keep them together where they're easily accessible. You can quickly grab them, or if not the original, a copy of, you know, like your credit cards, you don't want to keep the original in the grab and go, but maybe a copy of it so that if it's lost or stolen, or it's in a natural disaster, blown away or whatever, you know what those numbers were, how to contact the company and so forth. Some people use a backpack to keep everything together. Some use a binder with dividers and sheet protectors to organize things. Personally, I use a waterproof, fireproof container. It's about 18 cubic inches, lifts up at the top. It's heavy, so it's not something easy to grab. I have to use both arms, you know, both hands to grab it and take it. But all of these things are things that, you know, can easily be found at Walmart or Target or your local office supply store. So they're easy to find, gather things together. This slide and the next one is just going to list some of the things that I'd recommend keeping in your grab and go. If, like I say, if not the original, then copies. And if you don't have a safe deposit box in town, on the next slide, there's some things I would recommend keeping in your grab and go at home if you don't have someplace like a safe deposit box to keep them. But, you know, things like copies of your driver's license, that identification, that's going to be important after a disaster. Your insurance, the contacts for your insurance, that household inventory that Joy just talked about, your immunization records. I know our valuable records, it didn't have enough lines and wasn't form fillable back at the time that I first started doing this, but I created a document in Word that I started keeping that same type of information. So, you know, it's something that's got all of our bank account information, who to contact with the credit card company, what financial professionals, you know, from all the way from doctors and lawyers to financial advisors, there's all our insurance contacts. And this is something, like I say, a lot of these are just financial best practices, because this is something that, you know, if you're the one that keeps all of your financial records at home, your spouse needs to know this if something happens to you. If something happens to both of you, the kids need to know where to find things. So all of this information is good in any event, but if you no longer have a lot of the originals or a lot of these, everything else that you own, having that in one place that's still survived the event or that you've been able to take with you is going to really help you be able to do things faster, be able to contact people, to know who to contact and so forth, you know, after if you do experience something like this. I've also started keeping account URLs, logins, password information, because so much of that is, you know, there's so much of our life that is online and digital anymore, and to be able to access it, if you lose if you're saving those things on your computer, if you've got a list at home in a drawer, whatever, if you lose that, you'll need some way to get into all of those accounts. Next slide, please. Safe deposit box key is something else that we keep in ours. Trust documents, wills, you know, durable powers of attorney. I would keep copies of all of that in some place safe like that. And a little notepad and a pen or a pencil is something else that's going to be really important, because after you go through something like that, you need something to write things down on. Conversations you've had with people, who you talk to, when, where, that sort of thing. So having that easily accessible immediately following would be helpful also. The things that I suggest, you know, if you don't have a safe deposit box at the bank, that you keep family records, you know, birth certificates, marriage certificates, deaths, divorces, you know, titles to vehicles, those kinds of things. If you don't have someplace else safe like that you're keeping them, I would advise keeping them in this grab and go box also. Next slide, please. So after you've gathered all of this important information, you've made your inventory, you've pulled together your documents, you've created that grab and go box, it's going to be important to keep things up to date. You know, personally, I try to do this after the first of the year. I'm already gathering things up, you know, to get ready for tax season, and it's just easy to go ahead and update if there have been any changes at that same time. I do keep a copy of that document in the grab and go, as well as it's in the cloud, so it's easily accessible from anywhere. That may not be a good time for you. You may be busy with other things. So, you know, find some other time that's going to trigger a reminder to do that. It could be your birthday. Daylight savings day is coming up this weekend. So if the start of a new year is not a good time for you, find another time that does work for you. There are some things that you're going to want to do as soon as possible. So like as they come up, if you change your insurance providers, for example, you're going to want to record that information so you've got that. If you purchase a home, if you have a child, if you open or close accounts, if there's a death in the household, those are all events that you might want to immediately make changes to those documents that you keep in the grab and go. I'll tell you, you know, I've taught on this subject area for 13 years now, but I'm certainly not perfect. There's many of the things that we had in place that we've talked to you about today. But I've also mentioned, you know, we did find ourselves underinsured in some cases when we had something happen to us. And another thing that I will admit is that, you know, there are some things that I wish that I had kept up to date a lot better than I had. And the home inventory is one of them. It's something that, you know, it takes time and work to do these things we're talking about, to put these measures in place, to keep everything up to date. But I can tell you, you know, from personal experience, it is something that's well worth the time and effort to do. Next slide, please.
Okay, so part of creating your disaster plan is including the whole family in with that. And the biggest thing is communicating that family plan with everybody. Do they know where those important papers are stored? Do they know to grab them? But other things are just even where will you meet? If it's, maybe it's just a house fire, but where are you going to meet outside of that? And sometimes those natural disasters don't happen when we're all at home. So again, knowing either contact information like with school and work, maybe you need to know out of town contacts. I always think of my father and I live here in Kansas, but my brother and my mother live in Colorado. So that if we couldn't communicate, you know, we could contact my brother and both let them know that we were okay, and they could exchange that information to the other person. So again, everybody having contact numbers, knowing where to meet, and who to call can be just as important. Next slide. And then you may have some special population needs to consider in the financial aspect, let alone just the safety aspect. So you might have some exceptional family members. You might have an older family member, maybe in a care facility you need to consider. Children of every age and even in college, pets. So those are a big concern. As Deb said, you know, completing your grab and go. We were doing identification papers and I never thought about putting my pet in there. So we did do that to prove that my cat is my cat. And then even those either stationed abroad, as in military, or just you might have loved ones in other countries. And so again, having coworkers, I have known lots of people who do have relatives across the seas. So those are considerations in communication and keeping in touch with in case of a disaster. Next slide.
I'm going to talk just very briefly, due to the interest of time, on after a disaster. Because if you have a disaster happen to you, you know, there's going to be some things you're going to want to do immediately. The first thing would be to try to protect your property from further damage if you can. You're going to want to contact that insurance agent to get the claims process started, but don't dispose of property, start doing too much cleanup, making permanent repairs and so forth until that insurance adjuster's had a chance to come out and assess the damage. Go ahead and take photos of what happened, you know, keep records from expenses, both personal and repairs to property. But you really do want to contact the insurance company and have that adjustment process started before doing too awfully much. Next slide, please. Go ahead, you know, document the disaster, what happened, when it happened, what damage was sustained. There may be several agencies and groups in the area that are helping to provide assistance, things like the Red Cross, Salvation Army. In the event of a naturally or a federally declared disaster area, FEMA may come in to help. You know, they may be there to assist with food and shelter. They may have vouchers to give you. They may expect receipts back. You may have to meet back with them and prove how you spent that money they gave you. You know, so, you know, I can't stress enough, keeping receipts related to anything with the disaster is going to be really important. And then next slide, please. I just want to comment, you know, you're going to have family and friends who want to help you. They may not know how to help you, and you may not, to be honest, have a clue to begin with what you need help with and where to even start, because you may not have any idea where to begin yourself. So I've kind of made a list of some ideas on things that people could help you with, friends and family members who want to do that. You know, they can help to witness the damage. They can photograph what's happened. We had a neighbor who went around on a four-wheeler and just photographed everything out in the fields, you know, after the tornado that hit us. And it was very helpful later in recreating things and knowing what happened and what kind of condition things were in and so forth. Providing storage space, you know, maybe they have some extra space in the garage or basement to store some of the things you've been able to salvage. And maybe one of the biggest things they might be able to do is to just be there for you to help support you emotionally through the ordeal, you know, providing that moral support, because it's going to be a very overwhelming time. And just knowing that people are there for you, how, you know, to support you, thinking of you, praying for you, as well as the helping with the physical pickup of stuff or salvage of property can mean an awful lot. So let them do it. It's something that I know it's hard to do. You don't want to be a burden on anybody and so forth. But, you know, I know having gone through something like that, I want to do whatever I can help to help the next person. And so my advice would be just let them do it. Next slide, please.
Okay. So after a natural disaster is just the perfect combination for another storm of being fraud and scams. And because of a natural disaster event, that stress reduces our ability to make decisions, let alone make good decisions. So we just want to be careful that we're not falling for them and losing money. So one thing is yes, FEMA and insurance agents are out, inspectors are coming out to help you, but they will always have a badge. They will not require you to give any money. They're not going to be making phone calls and asking for personal information. So just to be aware, to take names and do some cautionary. It is okay to get a second opinion before you start signing and making decisions. So slow down, take a breath, and take your time moving forward with that. So anyway, it's just to be aware that, you know, giving cash or Venmoing money where you may not be able to get it back or have receipts, you don't have much protection with that kind of item. So that concludes our presentation, and hopefully we left a few minutes for questions.
We did have one question come into the chat box. Melissa asked, is there a benefit to photos versus a video through your property?
My thoughts about a video are to upload them or to download them. They just require so much data or the ability to transfer. It may be hard to review that video. So if you're doing a video, they probably need to be really short and sweet. And I don't know the magical 1 minute, 2 minute. So that's my only concern about video is how do they get stored? Because I just know I can't email a video to somebody. It's too large of a file.
I think no matter what you do, you want to keep it in a safe space. You want to keep it, have cloud storage that's large enough for it, for example, or keep that flash drive or whatever, the SD card or, you know, whatever it is, in that grab and go. I know I had taken, this was back before I had the ability, I guess, for my camera and uploading things very easily that way. I had gone around and taken photos of things in the house. I had got the camera out of the grab and go to be able to do that again because we purchased some new furniture a couple months before the tornado, and it never got back into my grab and go. So that's part of why the whole home inventory thing took a lot longer for me to recreate some of that stuff than what it could have or should have.
Doing a video is probably quicker and faster than doing all the individual pictures. But
and you could also narrate it as you're doing it, but yeah, it might need to be, you know, just a little, one closet at a time, kind of, you know, small, short videos for size consideration.
And I know we have technology where you can piece your pictures together to create a video and then do a voiceover of what the item is and all that information. So there's a whole combination, and it is what you're comfortable with. There's people who are very tech savvy and will do fine with video and being able to retrieve it and all that. So it's kind of, it's whatever you will do.
True.
And I guess that's the take home point. It is whatever you will do. Something is better than nothing.
Yeah. Chiquita says she's also encouraged family members to purchase fire and waterproof safes for their family members as a gift. And that's a great idea. I know I got my son one time, one for Christmas. It's not as large as mine because at the time he was a college student, so he didn't have that many valuable papers, you know, to try to keep track of. And I purchased mine at, I think it was Century brand, not that I'm recommending or at, you know, whatever, any specific thing, but it was, I purchased mine at Walmart. I've seen them at Staples. I've seen them, I think, at Office Max. So I think they're pretty easy to find.
Alrighty, thank you, ladies, for that answer. Did we have any other questions that have come in so far?
Rachel says you can get them at Amazon too, but I would make sure that you use somebody that has free shipping on that one because they are heavy.
We did not have any additional questions.
Alrighty, I think at this time we're gonna break, and I believe Sherilyn is gonna announce our door prize winner. So let's turn it over to Sherilyn to see who our winner was today.
Yes, we do have a winner. We had Dee Reinhold from McPherson. Is she still on? Dee, are you here? I do see her still on. So if we'll, I have your email and I will get it to our presenters and they'll follow up with you.
Alrighty, thank you, Sherilyn. And with that, we also want to thank our presenters today for the wonderful job and great information they presented. Debra and Joy, thank you for joining us. I'm sure many of us heard and learned a lot of new things that we can take home and put into practice. We do encourage all to complete our survey by using the codes up on the screen. This will also be sent to you right after this concludes and will be available on the Living Well website. Feel free to provide any comments, suggestions, or just tips or tricks, excuse me, moving forward to help us make this series better. We do hope that you'll continue to join us as we wrap up our series on the 23rd of March. The topic for that day will be Consumers Beware, Avoiding Identity Theft and Scams. We will have presenters Barbara Stockerbrand and Janae McNally join us for that day to help consumers avoid becoming a victim of potential fraud. And lastly, if you would like any additional information or resources, please reach out to your local extension unit. If you're not sure where your local office is, you can find it by going to ksre.kstate.edu. You will be able to hover over your county and find the location of your local extension office. Again, thank you all for joining us today and have a great rest of your afternoon.